was a cold night on the outskirts of Nevada, the kind where the wind howls through empty highways and neon diner signs flicker against the darkness. Inside a small roadside diner, Steven Seagal sat quietly in a corner booth. Black jacket, dark jeans, hair slicked back, eyes calm as stone. He wasn't there for attention, just a late dinner in peace after a long ride. The faint hum of blues music filled the room, mixing with the scent of coffee and fried bacon. The quiet broke when the door swung open. Bam! A gang of bikers stormed in, loud laughing, their boots clanking against the tile. The kind of men who owned the night, covered in tattoos and attitude. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a skull patch on his vest, scanned the diner like he owned it. His gaze fell on Seagal, sitting alone, unmoved by the chaos. That calmness irritated him. He walked closer, grinning, his voice echoing through the diner. "What's wrong, old man? Too quiet for you?" The others chuckled, knocking on tables, trying to provoke a reaction. But Steven didn't even look up. He simply took another slow sip of his tea. That silence was louder than any insult. The biker frowned, tapping the table beside Steven's cup. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Still nothing. Just a calm breath. The waitress froze behind the counter, sensing danger. A trucker in the corner put down his burger, watching closely. The air grew heavy. One wrong move and this diner would turn into a battleground. Finally, Seagal raised his head. His eyes met the biker's, sharp, steady, and impossibly calm. He spoke softly, yet it cut through the noise like a blade. "Son," he said, voice deep and deliberate, "you really don't want to do this." For a moment the room went still. Even the jukebox seemed to pause, but arrogance always tests peace. The biker laughed, brushing it off. "Oh yeah? And what's an old man like you gonna do?" What happened next would leave everyone in that diner speechless. The biker's laughter echoed through the small diner, sharp and mocking. His crew joined in, a chorus of arrogance filling the air. Steven Seagal didn't move. His posture remained the same, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady. That stillness only made the bikers more restless. They thrived on reaction, but Steven gave them nothing. The leader, a bulky man with grease-stained hands and a scar across his cheek, leaned closer. "You think you're better than us?" He sneered. He slammed his palm on the table, making the tea ripple. "I said, I'm talking to you." Seagal calmly set his cup down, eyes never leaving the man's face. "You're talking," he said quietly, "but you're not saying much." That line hit like a spark. The biker's face twisted in anger. He shoved the table, spilling the tea across the surface. The other bikers cheered, egging him on, recording on their phones, expecting a brawl. The waitress gasped, whispering, "Please, not here." But nobody listened. Steven slowly stood up. His movements were measured, graceful, controlled. He wasn't trying to threaten anyone. But the sheer presence in his stance shifted the energy in the room. He looked at the biker, eyes calm as ever. "Walk away," he said. "You've had enough for tonight. But pride is a dangerous thing." The leader smirked, puffing his chest out. "You think I'm scared of you? You're just some washed-up old guy in a leather jacket." The other bikers laughed again, louder this time. One of them grabbed a ketchup bottle and tossed it toward Seagal's booth, red liquid splattering across the table. The mockery continued, turning meaner by the second. Steven's patience, however, didn't crack. Years of martial discipline had trained him to read the room, to measure energy, not words. He could feel the hostility burning, but he also knew how quickly fire could die when smothered by control. The trucker sitting nearby whispered under his breath, "Man, that's Steven Seagal. You idiots don't know who you're messing with." The biker leader didn't care. He stepped even closer, his boots thudding against the floor. "You got a problem, tough guy?" He growled, his breath thick with whiskey. Steven's voice dropped even lower, calm but commanding. "The problem," he said, "is you don't know when to stop." The biker's grin vanished. He shoved Seagal hard in the chest. The impact barely moved him. The room went dead silent. For a few seconds no one breathed. Then the biker raised his voice. "Come on, show me what you've got." That was it. The trigger. The audience could feel it through the screen. The calm before the storm. If you were in this diner right now watching a group of bikers threaten someone, what would you do? And where are you watching this story from? Comment your city and country below. Let's see who's with us tonight. The tension reached its breaking point. The biker swung a punch, wild and sloppy. But before his fist even connected, Seagal shifted. One small sidestep, almost too fast to follow, and he caught the biker's wrist mid-air. Crack. The sound was subtle, but it cut through the silence like thunder. The biker winced in shock, his arm twisted effortlessly into a lock. Seagal didn't hurt him. He just held him still, perfectly controlled, like time had stopped. The other bikers froze, unsure what to do. They'd expected a fight, not this. Precision. Stephen looked him straight in the eye. This, he said softly, is why you should think before you act. He released the man's arm, stepping back with quiet authority. The leader stumbled, clutching his wrist, humiliated but too stunned to react. His pride was wounded more than his body. No one laughed now. Even the loudest biker had gone quiet. The waitress stood behind the counter, eyes wide, whispering, "Oh my God." Stephen didn't smirk, didn't boast. He simply picked up a napkin, wiped the spilled tea, and sat back down. The calm returned, but this time it wasn't silence born of peace. It was silence born of respect. The leader stepped back, red-faced and trembling with anger. His men looked at him, uncertain, waiting for a cue, but even they could see the shift, the moment power changed hands. Stephen's gaze flicked toward the door. "You can leave now," he said, not as a threat, but as a choice. The biker hesitated, torn between pride and fear. "This ain't over," he muttered. Seagal didn't respond. He didn't need to. The way he sat back down, calm, untouchable, said everything. The biker's hand still shook as he backed away. The night wasn't over, but the game had changed, and what happened next would test Stephen's patience and his power, like never before. The diner had fallen into an uneasy silence. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint hiss from the coffee pot filled the room. The bikers stood frozen, eyes darting between their leader and the calm man who had just dismantled him with one effortless move. The leader's pride burned hotter than his pain. He clenched his fist, glaring at Steven Seagal as if trying to reclaim control through sheer intimidation. "You think this is over?" he growled, rubbing his wrist. "You're gonna regret that." Stephen didn't even glance up. He took another sip of his tea, the same composure, the same stillness. That calm drove the biker mad. He turned to his crew, shouting, "You just gonna stand there? Let's teach this guy a lesson." The others hesitated. A couple of them muttered under their breath, "Man, leave it, that's Steven Seagal." But the leader's ego didn't allow retreat. He grabbed a chair, kicked it aside, and charged forward with a roar. Stephen rose slowly like a storm taking form, silent but inevitable. The leader threw a punch aimed at Seagal's head. In a blur of motion, Stephen sidestepped, parried the strike, and used the man's own momentum to send him crashing into a nearby table. Plates shattered. Coffee splashed. Gasps filled the room. The biker hit the floor hard, groaning in disbelief. Stephen stood above him, not angry, just centered, breathing steady. "You've got strength," he said calmly, "but no control. That's why you keep losing." One of the other bikers, younger and hot-headed, couldn't take the humiliation. He lunged forward, swinging wildly. Stephen caught his arm mid-swing, twisted and lightly pushed, sending the man stumbling backward into the jukebox. The music cut off, leaving the diner drenched in silence once again. By now, everyone inside, from the waitress to the trucker, was glued to the scene. Phones were out, recording what would soon become viral gold. Stephen turned to the gang. "Go home," he said quietly. "It's done." But the leader, stubborn and bruised, forced himself up again. "You think you can humiliate me in front of my guys?" he barked. He grabbed a knife off a nearby table, waving it shakily. Gasps rippled across the diner. The waitress covered her mouth. The trucker stood, ready to intervene but frozen in place. Stephen didn't flinch. His voice remained calm, low, and almost gentle. "Put it down, son. You don't want to make this worse." The biker charged again, knife raised. In a flash, Stephen's hand moved in one swift motion, disarming him effortlessly. The blade clattered across the floor. In the same fluid movement, Seagal twisted the man's arm behind his back and gently forced him to kneel. No pain, no rage, just precision. "You still think power comes from fear?" Stephen asked quietly. The biker said nothing, panting heavily, humiliated and beaten. Stephen let go and took a step back. "Learn control, or life will teach it to you the hard way." Have you ever seen someone stay completely calm when everyone else lost control? Type respect in the comments if you admire Stephen's patience and strength. The leader stayed on the floor, chest heaving. His friends finally snapped out of their shock. One of them muttered, "Boss, let's just go." But Stephen wasn't done teaching the real lesson, not with words, but presence. He walked over, picked up the knife, folded it shut, and set it gently on the counter. "You walk around thinking you own the world," he said softly. "But power, true power, comes from peace." The bikers exchanged uneasy looks. Their leader avoided his gaze. Slowly, they backed toward the door. One by one, they stepped outside, their engines roaring to life. The sound faded into the distance, swallowed by the desert night. The diner exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for minutes. The waitress leaned against the counter, whispering, "I've never seen anything like that." Stephen simply nodded, adjusting his jacket. "You don't win by fighting," he said. "You win by ending the fight before it starts." He left a generous tip on the table, nodded to the stunned trucker, and stepped out into the cool air. The neon sign buzzed faintly as the door swung shut behind him. Outside, the moonlight reflected off his jacket as he walked toward his black motorcycle parked by the curb. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, quiet once again. But Stephen knew this wasn't over yet. Some lessons take longer to sink in, and some egos refuse to learn until the world forces them to. Tonight, those bikers had met the calm before the storm. The real storm was still waiting to rise. The engines outside roared angrily as the bikers circled their leader, humiliated and silent. The cold Nevada night carried a strange stillness, that kind of quiet that only comes after chaos. Inside the diner, the waitress started cleaning up broken plates with trembling hands. But her eyes kept drifting toward the window. She couldn't believe what she'd just seen. Stephen Seagal stood beside his motorcycle, the wind gently tugging at his jacket. The faint glow from the diner lights traced the calm lines of his face. He wasn't angry, wasn't smug, just still. Centered. The kind of calm that only comes from decades of discipline. The biker leader pushed the door open again, face red and eyes wild. "You think you're tough, huh?" he barked, voice cracking. But his tone was different now. Less confident, more defensive. "You don't know who you're messing with." From a corner booth, the trucker finally spoke. His deep voice carried authority, and every word made the air heavier. "No, son," he said slowly. "You don't know who he is." The bikers turned to look at him. The trucker leaned back, a faint smirk on his weathered face. "That man you just swung at him, that's Steven Seagal." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. One of the bikers frowned. "Steven? Seagal? Like the Steven Seagal?" The waitress froze mid-motion, her eyes widening. "You mean the actor? The martial artist?" The trucker nodded. "The same one. Black belt in Aikido, law enforcement trainer. Guy's been breaking bones on screen for 30 years. Murmurs rippled through the diner. The leader's expression shifted from defiance to disbelief. "No way," he muttered, shaking his head. "That can't be him." But as he looked again, really looked, he saw it. The sharp gaze, the composure, the way Stephen moved like every muscle had a purpose. It wasn't an act. It was real. Outside, the wind howled softly, like nature itself had gone quiet in respect. The leader swallowed hard, pride clashing with realization. He turned toward Stephen, who was now securing his gloves, ready to leave. "You're really him?" he finally asked. Stephen didn't turn. "Does it matter?" he replied calmly. The simplicity of the answer hit harder than any punch. It wasn't arrogance, it was wisdom. The kind that made even the toughest men question themselves. The biker took a hesitant step forward. His tone had lost all bravado. I didn't mean to." Stephen looked over his shoulder, eyes steady but kind. "You meant every word," he said, voice calm. "But that's how people learn, by seeing what their actions cost." The other bikers stayed silent, their earlier laughter replaced by uneasy respect. The waitress slowly approached, clutching a towel. "Mr. Seagal," she whispered, almost in awe. "Are you all right?" Stephen gave a faint nod. "I'm fine," he said softly. "No one got hurt?" "That's what matters." The trucker stood, tipping his hat. "Son, you just made history in this diner," he said with a chuckle. "People won't believe what happened here tonight." The biker leader lowered his head, shame creeping in. "Look, I messed up," he admitted. "Didn't know who you were." Stephen stepped closer, his voice dropping low enough for only him to hear. "You don't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect," he said. "That's something every man should live by." The leader's jaw tightened. His hands trembled slightly, and not from pain, but guilt. "You're right," he murmured. Stephen offered a small nod, then turned toward his motorcycle. The sound of his boots on the pavement echoed in the cool night air. He swung his leg over the seat, the motion effortless, precise. Before he could start the engine, the biker leader called out, "Now wait." Stephen paused, looking back. "Thank you," the man said quietly, his pride finally breaking. "For not hurting me, when you could have." Stephen gave a faint smile, the kind that carried both strength and compassion. "It's not about hurting people," he said. "It's about teaching them how to stop hurting others." With that, he started the engine. The deep rumble filled the air as the diner lights reflected off his chrome handlebars. The bikers stood watching, humbled, as Steven Seagal rode off into the night. The man who didn't just win the fight. He ended it. Inside, the waitress looked at the trucker, still stunned. "Was that real?" she whispered. He smiled, shaking his head. "With Steven Seagal?" he said. "It's always real." The next morning, the small diner stood silent under the orange glow of dawn. The cracked neon sign flickered faintly, as if exhausted from the night before. Inside, the same waitress from last night was wiping the counter, lost in thought. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. She glanced at the door every few seconds, half expecting that calm, steady man to walk in again. But Steven Seagal was long gone, just a quiet shadow in the desert morning. Still, his presence lingered, like the echo of a lesson everyone there would remember for the rest of their lives. Outside, the biker leader sat alone beside his parked motorcycle. His leather jacket was dusty, his knuckles bruised, but his mind was clearer than it had been in years. He hadn't slept. Not because of pain, but because of shame. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Seagal's calm face, heard that quiet voice. "You don't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." Those words replayed in his head like a mantra, each repetition cutting deeper than any punch ever could. He'd spent years trying to prove toughness, living by a code of dominance, but last night showed him what real strength looked like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was silent and controlled. Inside the diner, the trucker finished his coffee and walked over to the window. He spotted the biker outside and smirked. "Looks like somebody's having a long morning," he muttered. The waitress followed his gaze. "Think he'll apologize?" she asked softly. The trucker nodded. "He already has, and to himself. That's where it starts." Minutes later, the bell above the door chimed as the biker walked in. The diner went silent. Everyone turned to look. The same man who had caused chaos just hours ago now stood with his head down, eyes tired but sincere. He approached the counter slowly. "Ma'am," he said to the waitress, voice low. "I'm sorry for last night. For the mess, for the way we acted." The waitress looked surprised. "That's all right," she said gently. "Could have been worse." He shook his head. "Could have been avoided." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a few folded bills, placing them on the counter. "For the damage," he added. The trucker raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect that from you, son." The biker sighed. "Didn't expect it from me either." He hesitated, then looked up. "Who was that man really? I mean, beyond the name." The trucker smiled knowingly. "Steven Seagal ain't just an actor," he said. "He's a man who's seen the worst in people and still chooses to stay calm. You don't fake that kind of peace." The biker nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "Guess I needed to meet someone like that," he murmured. "Been running wild too long." Outside, the morning wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of distant engines, maybe from another group of riders on the open highway. For a moment, the biker thought about leaving town, forgetting what happened, but something inside told him to stay. To change, he turned to the waitress. "That guy," he said softly, "he didn't fight to win. He fought to teach," she smiled. "And you learned?" He looked down, almost smiling himself. "Yeah, I did." The door opened again. This time it was one of his own crew. The youngest of them, maybe 19, eyes full of confusion. "Boss?" the kid said hesitantly. "We heading out or what?" The leader shook his head. "Not yet. We owe this place some respect first." The kid frowned, surprised. "Since when do we—" "Since last night," he interrupted. "Now grab a broom." For the next hour, the bikers cleaned the diner they'd trashed, sweeping up broken glass, fixing overturned chairs, and helping the waitress replace the cracked window. Nobody ordered them to. They just did it. The waitress watched, moved almost to tears. "Never thought I'd see this day," she whispered. The trucker chuckled. "That's the Seagal effect," he said. "Man doesn't just walk away from a fight. He walks through people's pride and leaves truth behind." When the place was spotless, the biker leader placed his helmet on the counter. "If he ever comes back," he told the waitress, "and tell him he changed something." She smiled. "I think he already knows." The leader nodded, slipped on his gloves, and walked outside. His gang followed quietly. No laughter, no shouting, just the rumble of engines starting up. As they rode off into the rising sun, the leader felt lighter, as if he'd shed years of anger in a single night. Somewhere out there, he imagined Steven Seagal riding down another highway, unaware of the change he'd sparked. And maybe that was the point. True power doesn't demand recognition. It inspires it. The waitress watched the bikes fade into the horizon and whispered to herself, "Guess heroes don't always wear capes." The trucker smiled, sipping the last of his coffee. "No," he said softly. "Sometimes they wear leather jackets." By the time the sun climbed high above the Nevada horizon, Steven Seagal had already been riding for hours. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a silver ribbon cutting through the desert. His Harley rumbled softly beneath him, steady and strong, the same calm rhythm as his heartbeat. There was no music, no noise, just the sound of wind against leather and the faint echo of his thoughts. He didn't look back. Men like Seagal never did. When he rode away from something, it wasn't to escape. It was because his lesson had already been taught. And in his silence, there was peace. A small desert town appeared in the distance. Gas station, diner, motel, the usual. He pulled over near a rusted sign that read, Silver Peak Junction. The same kind of quiet place where he always stopped, places the world forgot. He parked the bike, removed his gloves, and sat on a bench outside a gas station, watching the dust swirl in the hot air. The old man behind the counter recognized him instantly. "You're him, aren't you?" he asked, stepping outside, wiping his hands on a towel. Seagal smiled faintly. "Just a traveler, brother," the old man chuckled. "Funny. Not many travelers leave legends behind." Seagal didn't respond, just nodded, his gaze drifting toward the road again. Moments later, a pickup truck pulled up. The driver leaned out. It was the truck driver from the diner, the one who had witnessed everything. He'd been trying to catch up to Seagal since dawn. "Hey," he called, stepping out. "Been looking for you, man." Seagal raised an eyebrow, amused. "You got a long road behind you." The man laughed, still catching his breath. "You don't even know what you did back there. Those bikers, they cleaned the whole place up, apologized to everyone, even paid for the damage." Seagal looked at him calmly. "People can change when they see the truth," he said softly. The trucker nodded. "Yeah, but it ain't every day someone shows them what truth looks like in motion." The two men sat in silence for a moment, the desert wind whistling softly between them. Seagal reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden bead bracelet, worn from years of use. He handed it to the trucker. "Keep it," he said quietly. "A reminder that peace doesn't mean weakness." The trucker turned the bracelet in his hand, speechless. "Thanks, man. You really walk the talk, huh?" Seagal smirked slightly. "Talking's easy. Living it, that's the work." Just then his phone buzzed. A message from an old friend back in Los Angeles. It was short, saw the video. "You went viral again?" Seagal sighed, shaking his head with a faint smile. "I didn't do it for the views," he muttered. The trucker laughed. "Doesn't matter, brother. The world needed to see that kind of strength." Across the internet, millions were already watching the diner footage. Shaky phone clips of Seagal facing the bikers with nothing but calm control. Comment sections were overflowing with praise, respect, and disbelief. This is how real men handle disrespect. Steven Seagal just schooled an entire gang with silence. Power isn't noise, it's restraint. But for Seagal, none of that mattered. Fame was just another illusion. What mattered was that maybe, somewhere out there, a young man watched that clip and decided to handle his next confrontation differently, with patience instead of pride. He finished his tea from a roadside thermos and stood up, stretching his back. The trucker got to his feet too. "Where are you heading now?" he asked. "Wherever the road goes," Seagal said. "There's always someone who needs reminding that peace can hit harder than fists." The trucker smiled. "Mind if I quote that?" Seagal shrugged. Only if you mean it. They shook hands in firm, respectful final. Then Seagal mounted his bike, started the engine, and gave a nod before riding off once more, dust rising in his wake. The trucker stood there watching until the roar faded into the distance. Later that evening, the waitress from the diner posted a message online. It read, "Last night a fight almost broke out in my diner, but instead we witnessed something powerful. Calm defeating chaos." I don't know if he'll ever read this, but thank you, Mr. Seagal, for reminding us that respect still exists. The post went viral, spreading across platforms and news outlets. People shared it not for the action, but for the message. Parents showed it to their kids. Veterans nodded in understanding. Even the bikers themselves posted a video of apology saying, "We learned something we'll never forget." By nightfall, the world had already moved on. But in that quiet desert, Seagal kept riding. No headlines, no noise, just peace. He stopped by the edge of a cliff overlooking the vast horizon painted in gold and crimson. Removing his sunglasses, he closed his eyes for a moment, letting the wind brush against his face. In that stillness, you could almost hear the whisper of his thoughts. Not of victory, not of fame, but of purpose, because for Steven Seagal, the real fight was never against others. It was against anger itself. By the next morning, the internet had exploded. Every major news outlet from Los Angeles to London was replaying that same diner footage. Steven Seagal facing down a gang of bikers, calm, silent, and unshaken. The clip was barely 2 minutes long, but its impact hit harder than any movie he'd ever starred in. Headlines flooded the web. Steven Seagal ends fight without throwing a punch. The power of calm, how one man silenced violence. Bikers apologize after confrontation with Hollywood icon. Millions watched in awe as the story spread like wildfire. Social media turned it into a symbol, not of fame or celebrity, but of strength through control. People began sharing their own experiences, telling stories of moments when they'd chosen peace over pride. It wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It was a movement. News anchors analyzed it, calling it a masterclass in emotional discipline. Schools even began using the clip in seminars on respect and nonviolence. Everywhere, people were talking about that one quiet man who turned aggression into humility, without ever raising his voice. In Nevada, the small diner that once sat forgotten by the roadside had become a landmark overnight. Journalists showed up, camera crews hovered around, and locals spoke proudly about being there that night. But the waitress, now overwhelmed by the attention, had only one thing to say on camera. He didn't come here to be famous. He came here to remind us that peace still has power. As for the bikers, they kept their promise. They returned a week later, not to fight, but to rebuild the diner's sign, the one they'd cracked during the chaos. They replaced it with a new one that read, "Respect rides here," and just beneath it, in smaller letters, the quote that started it all: "You don't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The video of that rebuild went viral too, showing the same men who once caused trouble now working side by side with townsfolk, rebuilding what they had broken. It was redemption in its purest form, and people online couldn't get enough of it. Meanwhile, miles away, Steven Seagal had no idea how big the story had become. He was staying at a quiet temple in the mountains of California, meditating under the shade of an old oak tree. His phone lay untouched, notifications piling up. He didn't need to read them. He already knew the world had seen what it needed to see. A monk approached quietly. "The world is talking about you again," he said. Seagal smiled faintly. "Then maybe they're really talking about peace." The monk nodded. "And if they aren't, then they will," Seagal replied calmly, "because truth has a way of echoing." He stood looking out at the valley below, the soft wind carrying the hum of distant life, the world moving on yet somehow changed. Somewhere out there, men and women were thinking twice before raising their voices, choosing calm instead of chaos. That was enough. As the sun began to set, its golden light spilling across the mountains, Seagal whispered the same words he'd said that night in the diner. "Peace isn't weakness. It's control." And with that, he walked back toward the temple gates. No fame, no spotlight, just quiet purpose. Across social media, people continued to share his message. Hashtags like "Inner Respect Rides Here" Your power of peace and Seagal effect trended globally. Parents, teachers, even police officers reposted the story, calling it a lesson the world desperately needed. In the final wave of viral energy, the original video hit 200 million views, and under it, one comment stood out among millions. If you believe respect is stronger than violence, and type peace in the comments. The replies flooded in, hundreds of thousands of people, from every corner of the world, typing one word in unity: respect. And just like that, a story that began in a lonely desert diner became something far greater. A reminder that true strength doesn't come from fists. It comes from restraint. If you believe real strength lies in calmness, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more stories that prove respect always wins.